Last week, as I believe all of you were present, we discussed Panini, and we could see the foundational role, at least in our modern world of the last 2,500 years, that he plays in speech. In reviewing Panini, we saw that he's basically creating this a formal system that is capable of expanding infinitely and creating not only a language, but a system that can create other languages and can be applied to things like even computers. One of the things that I didn't really talk about last week that I think needs to be mentioned, especially in terms of the discussion that we're going to have tonight, is the brevity that Panini uses in his Ashtadhyayi. That this is one of the very important items of Panini, as it is in computer programming languages. Patanjali goes on in his Mahabhashya later to say that for the grammarian to save or restrict even a half-short vowel is equivalent to the birth of a son. So brevity, to be extremely concise and short, and to eliminate anything superfluous is central to Panini's sutras, and it becomes very important, crucial to Patanjali as well. Patanjali is the great commentator on Panini. Not only Panini, but there is another grammarian that I've mentioned briefly, XIII, and the three of them, Panini, XIII, and Patanjali, make up really the three great foundational grammarians of our times. I've mentioned before that previous to Panini were traditions of grammarians and masters of sacred speech, going back all the way to the beginning. Included among them are 80-some what they call the Indra grammarians, but this goes back into times where the texts are no longer in existence. Patanjali takes the text and the sutras of Panini and creates a commentary that up until today is the most authoritative commentary on Panini. And it is written in verse. It was composed, not written, excuse me, it was not written. It was composed orally in verse. It is beautiful in its exposition, and it's in the form of a dialogue between the guru and the disciple. In the commentary, he goes over the meta rules and the meta language of Panini. He gives many different examples. He brings up the criticisms of the grammarian XIII and sets an example that grammarians, masters of sacred speech, tantrics from Bhartrihari to Abhinavagupta to the present day refer to as the authority. Now, Patanjali has a mythical life if we want to call it that, as well as his life of producing great works. Patanjali is thought of as the serpent Sheshnag, or Adishesha, or Anant Nag. He is the serpent on which the Lord Vishnu rests as his couch in the ocean of milk, and can be thought of as the very foundation of the world. There's a story that Shiva once appeared to Vishnu and did his famous Tandav dance, the same one in which he revealed the 14 Maheshwara Sutras to both Panini and Patanjali. He did this dance for Vishnu, and while lying on top of Adishesha as his couch, Vishnu went through a complete transformation according to the syllables that came off of Lord Shiva's Damaru, his double-headed drum, while he was doing his Tandav dance. He gained tremendous weight, he became weightless, he became enormous of size, he became tiny of size. He assumed all the various dimensions and qualities of the world while resting on Adishesha. Adishesha wanted to know how and why that happened. He requested Lord Vishnu and then Lord Shiva, and Lord Shiva gave him a boon that he would be born into a yogini, and he would have a life where he would produce the great grammar of Shiva's dance. He would hear the 14 syllables himself and be one of Shiva's great devotees. And indeed, he was born to a yogini by the name of Gonika. Gonika wanted a son, and she prayed to Shiva for a son to whom she could pass down her great knowledge in her life and career as a yogini. And Patanjali appeared in her palm. Now there's another story in which he appears in the palm of Panini himself, both times as a little snake. Gonika, the mother of Patanjali in the first story, recites Gayatri Mantra and sprinkles some drops of Ganga jal over this little snake in her palm, and the little snake becomes a baby and eventually grows up to be the sage. Patanjali, with the lower half of his body remaining a snake. There are many, many stories about his birth and even where he lived. In the south, I believe there's a number of people who see him as coming from Sri Lanka. Others put his birth in other places of Tamil Nadu. In the north, in my tradition, we consider him coming from what is now Bihar or eastern UP. And in fact, there are those in my tradition that consider him to be an incarnation of Durvasa, who was one of Dattatreya's two brothers. when Dattatreya was born of Anasuya, and you can see in the images of Dattatreya that he has 3 heads. Well, one of his heads is that of Durvasa, one is Datta, and the third one is Soma. So we consider a very strong connection between Patanjali and Dattatreya in this regard. But as a snake, as Adi Shesha or Sheshnag or Anantnag, this is very curious because it plays into the next issue and next couple issues actually that we're going to discuss about Patanjali. And that is there just one Patanjali, or are there several Patanjalis? Because, you see, there is an academic opinion, not all academics, I think the academy is pretty much divided on this, as to whether Patanjali, the author of the Mahabhashya, the great grammarian, was the same Patanjali who was the author of the Yoga Sutra, which is what we're going to spend most of this evening discussing. There are academics, I believe, perhaps beginning with J.H. Wood of Harvard around 1915 or 1917, who analyzed the texts, the Mahabhashya and the Yoga Sutras, and came to the conclusion that they were written in different styles so that the authors must be different. And as I said, the academic community is pretty much divided on this. In the Indian tradition, I'm not aware of any division. Despite the fact that the Indian tradition is so diverse, there's so many sides to be considered. I'm not aware of any in the tradition that considers him to be separate individuals, the authors of these texts. Now, as a serpent, as Adi Shesha, there's 3 things that we can consider about him. Number 1 is he is the support of the world, being the couch of Vishnu on the ocean of milk. Number 2, the serpent, especially the great serpent, and in fact even little snakes, are said to be the guardians of the treasures of the world. That the cobra, for example, hides the jewel that man seeks to discover. So that the serpents are the gatekeepers for the treasures of the earth. The third thing that the serpent represents in this respect is poison. Snakes and poison. We just caught a Russell viper in the garden over here, and if the Russell viper bites you, you're in very big trouble. Okay. These 3 qualities of the snakes are recognized by Bhartrihari and Bhojdeva in the 3 texts and the 3 areas that Patanjali is credited with. It's not just the Mahabhashya and the Yoga Sutras. There's a 3rd text that he is credited with by some, and that is the Charak Samhita, which is pretty much the seminal text of Ayurveda. So we see in the words of Bhartrihari, that Patanjali came to purify the mind, the speech, and the body of man. And these three acts are reflected in his three great texts, the Mahabhashya on grammar, the Yoga Sutras on yoga, and we'll discuss what this means, yoga, and the Charak Samhita on medicine. Now, when Bhartrihari and Bodhdeva, both, Bhartrihari is probably around the 5th century AD, Bodhdeva is maybe a couple hundred years later, the purification of speech is obviously grammar, the Vyakarana of the Mahabhashya. Yoga is not the purification of the body at all. Yoga is the purification of the mind. Purification of the body is the Charak Samhita and Ayurveda, and he makes this distinction very, very clear.